Chapter 115. Speck on the Horizon. Summary. Mina just can't seem to stop running into people who want to kill her. Given everyone in this place wants to kill her, though, that's not really her fault. But she can't take many more fights before her body gives out. If she could just find a way to spot an exit door. The panic in the archer's eyes as Mina descends on them is palpable. They try to lift their notched bow towards her, but she's coming too fast. Her foot makes contact with their face, and if their nose wasn't flush with their face, she's sure she would have heard it crunch. Flinching back from the impact, the alien loses grip on their pulled back arrow. A small stripe of coolness blooms across her right leg as the projectile flies past. Ignored as she follows the archer's movements to the ground. She tucks her body into a roll, forward and to the side of the others. She wastes no time springing back up to face them, and neither do they. Acid burns with every strike, and momentum-carried kicks break ribs in a blur of combat. When the sword fighter swings an overhead strike at her, she catches his wrist with one hand, the strength of the swing almost overpowering her grab, but not quite. Then, swinging her free arm up and down, her elbow strikes at the inside of his own joint. The quiet popping sound that follows is drowned out by the cry of pain. All four of her pursuers lay on the ground, unconscious or writhing in pain from burns and broken bones. She dips down and snatches a discarded hunting knife, the feeling of it not quite familiar, but comforting nonetheless. For just a moment, she stands there, panting and bleeding, her grip ironclad on the knife in her hand, and looks over the group. One meets her eye for a brief moment from where they lay before her, splayed out, helpless on the ground. Then she turns away. It takes longer than she would have liked to slip out of the dense part of the forest and back to easier ground. The chase had led her even further into the heart of the forest, meaning that much more ground to cover to get to the wall. The thought grips her heart with icy panic, and tears threaten to bud in her eyes. Sucking in a deep breath, Mina ignores the way her lungs feel as though they've got a rubber band wrapped around them, and holds it for a moment before letting it wash out of her. The only thing she can do is start walking. Like before, she goes slow, watching out for any sign of movement, listening for any rustle of leaves in the unnatural, still forest. Her worn-through socks leave bare, raw feet exposed to the ground. Blood drips sluggishly from various cuts, clinging to her skin and never quite gaining the weight needed to coalesce droplets. When she sees rising cliffs of stone blocking her way straight forward, she pauses. So far, she'd been avoiding these sheer drops and climbs whenever she could, and she's sure it wouldn't take too long to go around this one, but... She cranes her head up, what she guesses is about 2 stories of rock, stopping at the orange leaves just visible over the edge. It's pretty high up, high enough that it might even have a view of the outer wall. It wouldn't be much. This place was so big she'd only be able to see a fraction of it, even up there. But it might just be enough to spot a way out. And she'd take anything she could get at this point, even if it meant climbing up a near vertical wall of rock. The deep slice in her arm and small cuts all over her body sting with every movement that pulls on them now that her adrenaline has gone down again. Somehow, this tree is a lot less comfortable than the last. Still, Mina heaves a breath as she tries to settle in. Even with the orange leaves blocking some of the view, it's still a pretty good vantage point. To one side, more trees dot the elevated terrain, sparse before land slopes back down and joins the rest of the forest. Elsewhere, the forest stretches out below, stopping in a curve of metal on one side. And if she squints, she thinks she can just make out a point to the left that seems a little different than the rest. It might be a door. It might not be. She really hopes it is. A shift in her weight sends another wash of pain over split skin. Arms, leg, back, side. She's got small cuts littered pretty much everywhere. Some are probably from the fight she just finished, but she can't be sure. She was just too caught up in the action to really tell after that first glance of the arrow. She'd wanted to break bones, and she had, yet it just left her feeling empty. Not good, not bad either. It just was. Most of the cuts are probably from her dash through the forest. They're shallow, just barely slicing through clothes and skin. Most of them have stopped bleeding, not even staining her tan shirt too badly. Others, though, leave trails of blood. Once again, she plucks leaves off branches and begins to wipe off blood in streaks. The worst gets washed away with acid before dried off by disintegrating leaves. Her skin doesn't feel clean, but it mostly looks it by the end. The lack of wetness or crackling dryness is nice. Even without the blood, Mina's pretty sure she still looks rough. Her clothes are torn. Her hair is a mess. It's been hours since she woke up, and she's exhausted. But she has to push through. If she stays still for too long, at this point, she thinks she might not be able to stop herself from collapsing. Which is not an option, because she has to get out of here. If her family hasn't found her by now, that means something is wrong. Either they're in trouble or being kept away from her, which is no small task. She's got to get up and keep moving. Get to the door and get out of here. Doing a sweep of her body, Mina checks for anything else she needs to take a look at before she leaves, because she has a feeling that there's not going to be another chance to rest. She's relatively clean, though the places where her acid had eaten through her socks to expose skin were looking rough. The only thing left that might be a concern is the blood-soaked bandage around her arm. The front half is completely saturated, and has been for at least an hour now. She can't tell if it's bleeding anymore. Hopefully not. But being too wet too long isn't good, with the risk it could be infected hanging around. But disturbing it might disturb its clotting and cause it to bleed. She definitely needs to put on a new layer of dry bandage, but the question is, should she try to get rid of some of the wet one first? If she can cut away most of the wet cloth not on top of the wound, then that should help separate it from things outside. Reaching around her back, she tugs the sheathed knife out from where it had been held against her body by her bra band. Cutting off a strip of her shirt is a lot easier than tearing it with her hands. Cutting off part of the bandage still wrapped around one arm is less easy, but using the tree and her mouth, she's able to get all but a blood-soaked oval cut away. Mina is grabbing the dry strip to tie around her arm when she spots movement. She freezes mid-grab, one hand gripping cloth and the other putting pressure on the wound now that the knife is stashed once more. Shapes move again, visible between the sparse trees leading to the cliff edge. It's another hunting party, and they're coming right this way. But it's not with the speed she'd expect if they had spotted her. They pick their way over the ground, watchful but not urgent. She sees their black eyes looking around ground level, peeking over the edge of the cliff and sweeping the trees in front of them. One pair of black eyes widened. Shit! She doesn't hesitate. In one fluid movement, she slips off her perch, catching a branch on her way down to slow her descent, before rolling with the momentum. Instead of heading for the approaching group, knife drawn and violence rolling off of her, she heads for the cliff. It'd be simple to take them out like the last two groups. It really would not be without getting hurt again in the process. Death by 1,000 cuts is a saying for a reason, and she really doesn't want to test that number. None of her injuries alone are enough to take her down, but altogether, plus a few more. She hadn't noticed it until she'd had the chance to sit down that second time. But under her skin itched a pervasive chill. Even when she took deep breaths and tried to relax, her heartbeat thrummed just a little faster than it should. Blood loss wasn't going to take her out as she was, but she didn't want to think about what might happen if she got another cut as bad as the one on her arm. The one she hadn't had time to rebandage before fleeing and was bleeding freely again. Great. It takes no time at all to reach the edge. She doesn't bother trying to find the natural or subtly melted holds she'd used on the way up. The moment where she hangs over the drop, feeling without seeing for something to hold her up, to find that first purchase, sends her heart jackrabbiting. When she can finally hold herself steady enough to lower her upper body fully off the safety of the flat ground, her heart doesn't slow. Stinging feet find purchase wherever they can as she melts grips into the stone with her hands. It's always easier going up than down, and that doesn't help her right now. As she descends faster than she should, feet slipping out from under her more than once. But she's almost at the ground, just a little further, and then she can drop the rest of the way without fear of breaking something. The sound of shuffling feet comes from above her, sending little crumbles of dirt drifting down beside her. Almost there! She's reaching down with her left arm when the sound of tension in a string being released comes from above her. There's no time to react before a swish on her right is followed by a jagged cutting, ripping through her raised arm. Unlike with the clean cuts from the blade she'd been shrugging off, this one burned with the pain of ripping flesh. It's only a moment, but the sudden jolt to her system causes her grip to loosen. Her feet slip out from under her as her other hand tightens its grip. The short fall sends enough force up her arm to tug her shoulder painfully, and her off-balance weight causes her body to twist on the way down, flinging her side and head into the pointed rock beside her. Her ribs ache, and she feels wetness spread from a point near her horn, and fuck! Head wounds bleed a lot, and this is literally the last thing she needs right now. Of course the fuckers up there have a bow. Why not? The universe fucking hates her right now. She needs to get down now before the next shot is through the top of her head. The image that springs to her mind at that makes her sick to her stomach. The arm that was slashed by the arrow protests when she uses it, but she pushes through, getting just a hold lower before pushing off the wall and letting gravity take her. It's higher than she would have liked, and the impact jolts her whole body, even as she dips in and out of a roll. Another snap of tension releasing, barely audible above the excited voices and her own racing heart, sends her dodging left. She's under the cover of trees before the next shot can be loosed. She keeps running, though. It was going to take the group a while to go all the way down the smooth slope of the outcropping. The now melted cliff face even more untraversable to anyone not desperate. And maybe, if she ran, she could make it to the odd spot on the wall before they made it. She was so focused on where she was headed, she didn't pay enough attention to where she was running. When burning erupts around her ankle, she's too caught off guard to scream. Or maybe It's just the level of pain coursing through her body as her leg is violently jolted to a stop from something pulling taut and tearing at her. She falls to the ground, hard. Her ankle is sending out sharp pain radiating in waves. It feels like multiple knives have been stabbed into her, digging into her bone, scraping against it. When her brain catches up enough to prompt her into movement, her arms getting under her to prop herself up, she can see that her interpretation of the pain isn't too far off. Because as she looks down, she sees metal jaws piercing her flesh. Her foot is caught in a bear trap.